Well, welcome all. Welcome. Good to see you all. Many, many friends. People will be coming on slowly over the next couple minutes, so we'll sit a little bit of meditation, but this is the Pacific Zen Luminaries series, and we're very, very pleased to have Joan Sutherland Roshi with us tonight. And we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes. Let's just let people come on and we'll sit with a koan. What is the heart mind of the ancient Buddhas? Flowering grove and forests of every color. That's a great koan. What is the heart mind of the ancient Buddhas? Flowering grove and forests of every color. Let's sit with that for a moment, just for a few minutes, and soak into that heart mind of the ancient Buddhas. Let that heart mind spread out to the four corners of the universe. What is the heart mind of the ancient Buddhas? Well, I think we'll find out in the next 90 minutes what this heart mind is. So thank you, Joan, so much for coming. An old friend, a co-founder of Pacific Zen Institute, and a teacher emeritus, as you all know, of Pacific Zen School. And Joan helped gather our miscellaneous koan collection, which is just a tremendous collection and stands alone by itself as a book. And we see that in this book here, which began as the collection of miscellaneous koans for the Pacific School. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Joan about that. So welcome, Joan.
So thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Nice. So I thought we'd start off with a reading, which is about the barbarian life that many of these Zen teachers in ancient China lived. And perhaps, Joan, you could read the Bodhisattva koan, your chapter Bodhisattva koan, which is actually the very last of your book. So we'll start in the beginning with the last.
Okay, so you want the bit about Yalo Jutsai?
Yeah, we need an introduction to Yalo Jutsai.
Right. So when the Khan invaded, the Mongolian Khan invaded China in the Middle Ages, he drove the government and a lot of the people who were living in the north down into southern China. And there was a group of ministers who decided that they would stay and try to talk the Khan into some mercy and toward the people of northern China and the culture, the artifacts and the buildings and all of that. And so this group of extraordinarily brave ministers remained, and Yalo Jutsai was among them, one of their leaders. And he was a koan student. He was a student of Wansung, the koan teacher who compiled the Book of Equanimity. And he asked Wansung, please send us the Book of Equanimity. We need koans for this. And Wansong said, I'm sorry, it was lost, because he had to flee south very quickly. It was gone. And Yellow Jutsai persisted, and Wansong reproduced it for him, recreated the collection for him. And it took 2 tries to get it up north, but they did. And the last image, which is one that stayed with me ever since I heard it, was of Yellow Jutsai and this group of ministers sitting around the campfire on the steps at the border between northern China and north of that, and reading these koans all night and looking for inspiration and guidance in this impossible task that they'd set themselves. So that is the wonderful Yellow Jutsai. And this is the way the book ends. Actually, you wanted to begin at the ending.
Indeed, please.
A very koan thing to do. When I imagine the koans past my own lifetime, the image of Yellow Jutsai and his conspiracy of friends sitting around their campfire always comes up. It seems likely that wilderness campfires and urban oil can fires, both metaphorical and actual, are in our future. And I hope the koans are part of the conversations around them, spoken and signed in all the languages humans have created. Shared as tools, I'll swap you a koan for a song or a creative organizing strategy. Shared as ceremony, let's pause to remember how vast this moment is. Here at the edge of the world as we've known it, it's dawning on us that the story that matters is not just our human story, but the story of the earth, which includes but is not limited to us. Koans are bits of the earth's wisdom rising through human heart minds. They've always been part of the response in times of great challenge and danger, as both solace and wake-up call. They've helped us surmount the insurmountable by seeing things differently, and they've given us trees older than the forest we're standing in to lean back against. What are the koans of this time, a time that is unlike any other? What will we tell each other around our urgent campfires under a still infinite sky?
It's lovely. I just love this. The koans are bits of the earth coming up through our bodies, expressing. Yeah.
That's where the koans are leading me. I think I'm so interested in the power of what we did together and what we continue to do, which is to explore this question of what koans and people have to do. If you put koans and people in a room together, what happens? And the many answers to that were so powerful. The romance of that, and I mean romance in the old sense, right? Has been so strong that I'm realizing it took me about 7 years of retirement from that activity to begin to ask a somewhat different question about the koans, which is separate from people. What are koans? And that's where this sense of koans as the earth's wisdom rising through our heart minds has begun to come. And that's where I'm going now with them.
Yeah, I love that. And hopefully we'll touch more about that and how your own practice and how your own teaching, has changed as you've entered the hermitage, perched on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. How did you get into this crazy practice of Zen and koan meditation?
Well, I've been doing things for a long time. I talk a little bit in the book about how I sort of started out at 13 in a bookstore near UCLA and reading. I probably read Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, that kind of thing. I mean, there wasn't that much around back in the Dark Ages, and then ended up heading up the street to study at UCLA so that I could read things in the original languages. And I did I did learn koans there. I worked when I was in graduate school, I worked with a professor, Ashikaga sensei, who gave me koans to translate. And as we were working on them, I began to realize that as he was correcting me, he wasn't just correcting my grammar, or my vocabulary, but he was really giving me the mind of the koans. And that was an extraordinary gift. And then I sort of did a lot of other things. I did some Jungian psychology, and I did some Tibetan Buddhism, and a lot of Soto Zen. And then it was actually the funeral of a dear friend that John Tarrant and I shared, and at that point I had kind of left Zen. I felt that it was an unrequited love. But when I was at that funeral and I heard John speak, I thought, oh, no, I'm not done yet, or it's not done with me, or whatever was true. And there was something else. And so I came to what was then California Diamond Sangha, and began to study koans. And that I took about 30 seconds to be doomed for life once I began.
Yeah. And what about the provenance of this book? I mean, how did it come together? And can you tell us some of your experience with miscellaneous koans, which I, as a teacher, I use every day. I know many of us use every day.
Well, I think that as we were working in all the new ways that we were working with koans and with people, the miscellaneous koans started to look like a tremendously valuable resource, because they're flexible and they're fluid and they change, and you can add to them and you could subtract from them. And so they're the part of any koan school's curriculum that is more chosen than inherited. And we thought, oh, here's a place we can bring new things in. We can bring Western koans in. We can bring koans that address more of the ways we live our lives as householders, and we can let some koans go that don't seem to speak so much to us anymore. So the possibility of the koans seemed really rich. And so we just began collecting, and at a certain point it seemed like a good idea to give it shape, because people were going to want to use it in some fashion. And so one of the great things about the miscellaneous when we put it together is because so many of the koans,
the we is you and John Tarrant, pretty much, right?
Largely, and then other people who were around at the time who also contributed to that, but largely it was our mistake. So a lot of these koans didn't have received answers. And so I can remember one of the most joyful times for me was that I took the miscellaneous as it was taking shape to groups of kind of longtime koan students in my various communities. I taught in about 5 or 6 communities at that time, and we would workshop them, and we would, and I would say, well, what would you do? And the richness of people's responses, it was so alive. So then once we had a sort of shape, and I know that they've continued to diverge, between what you all are doing and what I do, because they're continuing to move and grow, and that's right, that should happen. I decided it might be good to write a companion piece, which would be about how to work with the miscellaneous, since they're kind of the first collection that people come to, and if they're doing the curriculum, and also, as you're intimating, a tremendous resource. I mean, they're the best for so many things, and they're the best at really bringing out the parts of koan practice that we find particularly important. So anyway, I wrote a kind of manual for people who were deep in the miscellaneous, and then that was called Acequias and Gates. Right. And then from that came Through Forests, which is about twice as big and is meant to speak to a wider audience.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really kind of saying, here's this new way of looking, that we developed it for looking at koans and for being accompanied by koans, and here's some tips and some thoughts for how to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like you to explain the universe to us if you could.
Sure.
In a few brief minutes. Taxonomies of the radiant, you call it. I just love your language, Joanie. It's just great. It's sort of like flowing poetry, but taxonomies of the radiant, while what we awaken to is the same for all of us, how we awaken and express that awakening in our lives is endlessly idiosyncratic, which gives the world its texture. For each of us, awakening is a long arc that takes the shape of a human life. Could you read page 121 or so?
Sure. And if I can just maybe say briefly that all of this theory stuff really came out of my own experience and the experience of people I was working with. And there was a time where it became really important to not dismiss that or ignore it, but to try to include it and to try to create a theoretical or a poetical framework that would include what people were actually experiencing rather than just the received descriptions from the tradition. And this is part of that process.
Yeah, nice.
Enlightenment has been closely identified with koan practice, although it is only one part of the arc of awakening. Terms that are differentiated in their original languages have all been rendered as enlightenment in English, and the term is used in different traditions to mean different things. Then add the cloud of our projections and yearnings, and its meaning has been pretty thoroughly obscured. I use enlightenment to refer to a specific thing, an opening that is a profound transformative experience of the vastness and the insubstantiality of the self. This changes us through an abiding sense of awe and a kind of insightful clarity called prajna in Sanskrit. Koan study is meant to open us to such experiences, but this isn't the only transformative process at work. Coupled with enlightenment is endarkenment. At the center of the luminous temple, we find, is a well so deep with waters so dark that there's no penetrating it, no sense of where or whether it ends. This is what Taoists call the dark mysterious, and what Shuto said is the dark from which stream the branches of light that make up the universe. Endarkenment begins as a humbling realization of this unknowable mystery at the heart of things. It unfolds as a growing ease with the unknowing, an appreciation of the rich, invisible medium in which everything lives. Endarkenment also puts us right up against another enigma, one that faces not into the depths of the night sky, but into the depths of human life. In the midst of all this wonder, how much cruelty and sorrow there is, how bruised and broken all that streaming light can be up close. So acting, responding to this in some way is also essential to awakening. Our awakening belongs not just to us, but to the world. True, on many days, the world's awakening feels so agonizingly slow and inadequate that it rubs us raw, not unlike the way awakening feels inside us sometimes. This is where we can only say that when all is said and done. Fortunately, we are here to do it, which is from a koan. If you think of the Chinese and Japanese sense of a unified heart-mind, enlightenment is roughly related to the illumination of the mind, endarkenment to the liberation of the heart. The distinction between them isn't hard and fast. There are lots of boundary crossings. Enlightenment is, again roughly, what we come to know, while endarkenment is what we come to realize that we can't know. Insight and mystery, each with its radiance.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Endarkenment. 96% of the universe, I think you said.
Is dark matter and energy. Yeah, which means in any moment as we sit here, 96% of what's going on is invisible to us. So let's talk about mindfulness in that context. What does it mean to be, mindful of 96% in the dark?
Yeah, well, a point that I think you're making is that not only do we not reject endarkenment, we need endarkenment, right?
Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
can't be whole and complete without endarkenment.
Yeah, I mean, we, at the folk level, we all have these stories and experiences of people who can have kind of operatic openings, really large opening events, and then they're just complete jerks, and that is because there can be this overemphasis on enlightenment, on what what you can be certain about, what what you come to experience. And endarkenment is that kind of compensatory reminder of what we can't know and how beautiful and mysterious that is. And so the two need each other. The two bring out the best virtues in each other and heal each other too, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You say, if we open our hearts enough, the world will come fetch us. I want to ask you later about that word fetch. I love that. The world wants our awakening. The world wants our awakening. Mm-hmm. And endarkenment is a profound experience of the radiant dark source. The world is suffering from an abundance of certainty, you recently said.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
You also recently were speaking about your chapter called Pregnant, which, Hinton talks a lot about the dark enigma and about the pregnant quality, the Tata Garbha, which you mentioned. Could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Oh, that's a big subject. Can you narrow that at all to the thing that's
well,
your attention?
In a way, in a sense, this is the manifestation, of the endarkenment within us, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the imagery of pregnancy, you say, has been part of the koan tradition from the earliest times. And Chan had already been speaking of being pregnant with sagehood for centuries. The Tathagata Garbha, the womb of the Buddhas, represents the Buddha nature abiding in potential in every human being. Meditators gradually nurture this potential until suddenly realizing and giving birth to it, becoming Buddhas themselves. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful image, yeah.
Yeah, an ancient one. Maybe I'll start with the word that David Hinton translates as enigma, dark enigma. I translated as dark mysterious, and it's a little, it's a tiny difference, but the important thing for me is that enigma kind of puts it in our heads, with something for us to figure out, whereas dark mysterious is something for us to enter and to realize is within us. So when I was working with people, I found that much of the traditional imagery in koan Zen has to do with glinting swords and running on knife edges and slashing and light and all kind of martial and very bright images, but that a lot of people actually experienced what was happening to them as a kind of spiritual pregnancy, as something happening deep inside them that they felt that they wanted to protect and nurture and bring to fruition, and that it had this dark, mysterious quality where you couldn't know what was going on, but something was going on, and then there was this realization of it, and so it's another time where people's experience. It's just describing people's experience, and there's that sense of the as you're saying, the Tathagata Garbha means womb, the womb where the potential for all of that exists, pre-exists in all of us, and there's a way in which we can gestate that pregnancy and bring it into our own lives and into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was also caught by the metaphysics here are a little murky, but the alaya vijnana, which is the storehouse consciousness, where every single experience we've had and every thought we have about the experience comes and settles and remains, occupies the same space. It's sort of quantum physics where things are superposed. The alaya vijnana and the tathagata garbha are occupying the same space at the same time, so that Buddha nature, that dark, mysterious, that potential in all of us, occupies the same place as our own lives and all the experience of our lives. They're not separate. One does not supersede the other. And that seems like a beautiful thing to think about, that there is a place in us, the alaya vijnana, which can accept all our experience and hold it. And that it's right there that our Buddha nature grows and develops and becomes actual.
Mm-hmm. You know, you were talking about working with students, and I know it's been 7 years since, at least formally, you know, you've been giving dokusan or sanzen. And dokusan, of course, meaning to go alone, singular, in an honorific way. And sanzen means to going Zen, as opposed to zazen, which is sitting Zen, right? Mm-hmm. But you have some really wonderful passages about dokusan and this realizing, you know, this dark enigma, this enlightenment and endarkenment with students directly. And I wonder if you could read some of that for us.
Sure.
Page 41 or so.
Sure. Yeah. One of the most moving times in work in the room is when someone is having an opening. At first, the two of you sit in the silence, letting things unfold in the wild. At a certain point, it's time to ask some questions that will help deepen and give shape to the experience. This movement from the vastness into the world of form, which is the journey of every opening, begins in language. The beauty of someone trying to express the ineffable, searching for words that might come anywhere near the wonder, unaware of the movements of their hands, groping to mold something out of the air, their eyes looking around as though they might alight on something that would give them the language they need. Words, when they finally come, don't describe their experience, but are another instance of it. This is what my opening is like.
Hmm. And you use an example of Mujaku of Tokeiji, which is one of our miscellaneous koans, and you say, Mujaku, her tears become a solvent for what's unyielding within. The defenses we erect to keep from feeling the pain of life all the way through, which also keeps us from feeling its beauty all the way through. We contain both the timeless depths and the waves washing over the fragile raft that carries us from birth to death. Mujaku was an extraordinary woman. Could you tell us a little bit about her, perhaps?
So we're in the Middle Ages in Japan, and we're in the time when there are a few Chinese teachers who've come over to bring Chan to China so it can become Zen. And she is a young woman who's lost her husband early. She's a young widow, and she goes to the temple to see if there's something there that will help her with her grief, which she's caught in. She can't get out of. And so she asks the question that has, I think, become really beloved by a lot of us, which is, what is Zen? And the Chinese teacher responds, the heart of the one who asks is Zen. In other words, your heart, what's happening, your grief right now. And so she works with that, she stays with that, and she there's at one point the teacher, when something begins to open in her, he says, "Nun, take the Heart Sutra and go," which I've always loved. And she does, and she has these experiences, and finally has an opening where the bottom falls out of the bottom of her bucket, and she sees the moon there, and then it soaks into the ground. And then, so she went on to be one of the abbesses of Tokeiji Monastery, and taught generations of teachers, and her koans were studied by generations of people. And the part of her story is that I love so much is that this is you were talking before about our awakening belonging to the world. And in her case, a deer came to get her, and the stream came to get her, and the moon did, and all of that. And grief did. Grief came to get her. And grief was the Buddha of that time in her life. And so she was fetched. She was fetched by all of them. And she was held by all of that until it could open out in her. And as she was held, then she could hold others and become a teacher in her own right. And that, it seems to me, is what awakening is, to know that we are held, and that by virtue of that, we can hold others.
Mm-hmm. And you were fetched, perhaps many times. There's an instance in the book.
I was apparently a bit recalcitrant because I had to be fetched quite a number of times. Yeah.
I wonder if you could read us about a fetching that you had.
Okay.
132, 3, and 4, and 5.
So this is from the chapter called The Feeling Life of Awakening. And it begins like this. A long time ago, when I was heading home from a retreat in which I'd experienced an opening, I witnessed the aftermath of an act of violence at a grocery store. I had no filters, no skin really, and it went straight in. The experience had an impersonal or transpersonal quality, not distanced or cool, but enormous, as if a heart the size of the world were stretching my rib cage to make room for itself. Since then, I've sought to understand this heart whose emergence seems essential to awakening. And then a bit later, and I have to define a term of art here. So one of the things that'll come up is whatness. And whatness is tathagata, is that thing when you see the absolute complete presentation of the whole. It was the way that our teachers spoke about it. And it's translated as the suchness or the thusness of something, when something rises in the field and fills the world for you. Suchness and thusness, are wonderful. And I'm kind of partial to James Joyce's version of it, which is whatness. And he said, when you have an epiphany, the nature of the epiphany is when you really see the whatness of something. Okay, so my last stop returning from the retreat that day was to pick up the dog who lived with me in those years. As she bounded down the path, I saw her not as my dog, the creature who made me the woman with the dog, but as the particular being she was, all unto herself. The how this relates to me filters, which I hadn't even realized were operating with her, were replaced by wonder and awe at her concentrated and perfect whatness. And this strange new heart of mine almost burst with a new kind of love for her. While the familiar shape of you eventually more or less reconstitutes itself, though you can never quite believe in it in the same way, but that's a tale for another time. The need to repay a powerful debt of gratitude grows. When openings first appear, they are wildly idiosyncratic and can take some discernment for a teacher to recognize among the altered states of a retreat. But gratitude is so universally present that it's a reliable marker. At the end of his journey to heaven, Dante says that he has seen things he's unable to describe, but their lingering traces will be his theme until his song has ended. You know you have received a grace of incalculable worth that you can by no known metric be said to deserve. That makes for a deep and humble appreciation of Dante's vow.
Nice, nice. I love the image of your dog bounding towards you, you know, and you're seeing her with fresh eyes. And yeah, it's great. You know, we were talking earlier about how our our use of koans, in some ways, our response to koans are changing. We talk about the hakuin response, and then we talk about the response in your life, and that the tradition isn't static but supple and curious, as you say. Also, not yet complete. Even Hakuin himself, that Zen is an unfinished koan.
Yeah.
He says. What about how things are moving as you see that and see it in the koan world?
My koan world is pretty small these days. It's me and the koans pretty much, but I would say that how I see it is what I was talking about earlier, which is a kind of listening to the koans for what they want to say, even outside the small context of koan study of our work with them. And so I'm just at the beginning of that, and I'm in the listening and trying to catch up phase of that exploration. But I've become interested in what the koans might be pre-Chan and post-Zen. Mm-hmm. What are they? What if they are a stream or a current on their own? What would happen if we push the river a little further in both directions? And also, I've come to see how even within the schools of Chan and Zen, which we tend to think of as being kind of, on the margins, because they're on the margins in most Western cultures, but they have their own mainstream, and they have their own orthodoxies. And I've become really interested in what I call the lunar countercurrents to those mainstream versions of Chan and Zen, and how the koans can be part of that lunar countercurrent. They can be part of that view from the dark or view in the dark, and that the surface mainstream can be vivified and refreshed by digging wells down into those underground currents and bringing that fresh water up. So I'm interested in how the koans might serve in that way too.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear more about that, about how your practice, how your relationship with koans are changing, because you talked about earlier how koans, when you were seeing students all the time, were very anthrocentric, right? They were very human-centric, and now they're very sort of, in some way, earth-centric, right? That you're seeing that they're actually coming from the earth, and yeah, they do realize us as human beings, but they also are realized everywhere and elsewhere. Right?
Yeah. Again, just at the beginning of that, so I don't have a lot coherent to say about that yet, but this is not it doesn't feel like a progression, like that was then and this is now. I mean, that again, that thing about you put a person in a room with a koan, what happens is so gorgeous and so compelling, and that's a whole beautiful thing in and of itself. And this is to put next to that, which is how do the koans speak through the trees? How do they speak through the ocean? How do they speak through the wildflowers? What is that voice? And I'm just beginning to develop the ear to hear that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Um, this is a real non sequitur. We're talking about responses to koans, but I was afraid that I would never be able to mention this. Can you tell us the story about Alan Watts and the frog?
Oh, I love that story. So Alan Watts tells a story about a friend of his who was doing Rinzai practice in Japan, and he was sitting outside in the Sanzen line on the porch, and this poor unlucky frog jumped onto the porch in front of him, and he thought, "Aha! This is what I shall present in my interview with the teacher." So he grabbed the frog and stuck it up his sleeve, and then he went into Sanzen, and his teacher asked him about his koan, what he understood about his koan, and he whipped the frog out and placed it down on the floor between him and the teacher with a great flourish. And the teacher just shook his head and said, "No, no, no, way too intellectual."
That's a great story. As PZI teachers recently, we meet once a month, and we had a meeting about dokusan and about experiences about what our most remembered dokusan was as a student, meeting with a teacher as a student, and what our most remembered meeting was as a teacher. I think I warned you I might ask this question. Do you have examples or any stories?
Well, I'm gonna punt a little bit on this because I thought about it. I thought a little about it, and I thought, as a teacher, I probably shouldn't give like my favorite Sanzen story.
True enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
So that there isn't any kind of comparison going on. So I think I'll stick with the bit you asked me to read about that moment when a person is first trying to articulate this ineffable experience and try to carve it with their hands and their eyes, and say that is an extraordinarily beautiful moment. And for myself, I've had numerous wonderful moments as a student, and I have to say that one that was very early on and wasn't even with a teacher is one that stayed very powerfully with me. I was when I was living in Los Angeles, and I went down to LA Zen Center, and I was extremely ill, and there was something happening in me around in the illness that it had taken me to some kind of altered place. And I happened to look into the eyes of a student there, and the way that student looked back opened something in me, and the world fell open on the way home from that trip to LA Zen Center. And fortunately, someone else was driving the car. But that was a profound dokusan. Just the look in that person's eyes at just the moment I needed to see just that.
So nice, yeah. When you established the open source community, you did a lot of experimentation with improv and also, I don't know when this started, we do this as well with what you call work in the night, practices of the night. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about some of that improv and some of the practices of the night?
Yeah, just glance at it because it's a really, really big subject. But I was so interested in the ways that Buddhist dream practices and night practices, because it's not just about dreaming; it's about all different stages of sleep and wake, had a different purpose. In the West, we tend to focus a little bit on what does this tell me about my own psyche, or what is it? How is this in the realm of the archetypes? But in this Buddhist practice, it's really about, what do you think about states of consciousness now? When you realize that there are all these different states of consciousness and they're flowing in and out of each other all the time. So we would do practices of the night retreats where we would study the actual techniques and the things people would do. But it was as simple as people waking up in the middle of the night at a time when they were likely to have had a dream already, and going into the meditation hall and sitting together and bringing those dreams into their meditation. No speaking, but just doing that and then going back to bed. Or in the first thing in the morning, people would say just a few words about a dream that they'd had. And what was remarkable about that is as a retreat deepened and went on, you would see that there were themes emerging in the retreat, and that people were dreaming similar things or things that were in conversation with each other. And it was this beautiful look at what was going on underground in the retreat, and the ways that we were connected by all the fungi along our routes, and having similar imagery come up in our dreams. So those were the kinds of things we did. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah.
I like it all. Yeah. You say that there's a difference between dream interpretation, whose focus is dream interpretation, whose focus is self-knowledge, and the practices of the night, which are another way of transforming our sense of self and our sense of self in the world. The night practices help dissolve our distinctions between waking and sleeping, conscious and unconscious, personal and transpersonal. They help us discover instead an awareness that is the continuity beneath different states of consciousness, such as koan meditation does. So dream interpretation as not as a psychological practice, but sort of more of a felt sense practice, or how would you work with that?
Well, when we would do dream retreats, for example, the emphasis was on when you're awake or asleep or groggy, sleepy meditation, or very crisp, clear meditation, or walking around or lying down, what's the through line? What is, no matter what your state of consciousness is, what's the awareness that's there? And so people would walk around during the day when they were ostensibly awake and ask, am I awake? Am I dreaming? How do I know? And it was a way of saying, look, these things are all just a slip away from each other. I mean, consciousness is a very fluid thing. The self is a very fluid thing. So it tended to break down the really hard and fast boundaries of now I'm myself doing my business and now I'm asleep and not doing anything, but that there was this momentum going on all the time that was fluid and mutable and changeable, and people kind of really enjoyed that. And I'll tell you one story that was really delightful. When we did a dream retreat together at Olima, in the place with the white deer near Point Reyes, we decided to do a group dreaming where we would all agree that in our dreams we would meet in our dreams back in the meditation hall. And so everybody went off with their assignment for sleep. And the next morning I said, so what happened? How'd it go? Did you all meet back in the meditation hall? And everybody kind of said, no, But then people started to talk, and it turned out that someone said, I just ended up in the kitchen. And someone else said, I ended up in the kitchen too. And then someone else said, so did I. And so everybody had ended up in the kitchen instead of the meditation hall. And so what had initially looked like, a kind of failure ended up being this kind of glorious, meeting. And it's just that it wanted to happen in the kitchen rather than the hall.
You also experimented with improv. Anything to add there, or to?
Well, we would do artist retreats, and there were some people who were doing improv. Actually, everything they were doing was improv, because they would be working on something new when we would do the retreat. So we were exploring how meditation and koans and art making were the same and different. and how they what they were like in conversation with each other, and then people would do work together, and we had wonderful collaborations among musicians and dancers and visual artists that would happen spontaneously, and often they were improv in nature. So yeah, that kind of thing.
I see. Nice. Working, if you're up for it, working with koans in our time. You ask, how actually do koans work? What are they for? If practitioners are having experiences, both profound and outside the received tradition, do the practitioners have to adapt? Or does the tradition? How deep really is our understanding of the ancestors? And underneath everything else, what do the koans themselves want? You also write about koans as service. Should I read just a few lines of that? Is it?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Throughout the koans, there's a focus on serving, meaning caring for a world as wondrous and as devastating as we are. Koan meditation's inward turn serves an outward orientation. The aim of koan practice is to open a path into the world, a path that recognizes the luminous nature of things and also the complicated poignancy of embodied life. In this practice, we become the mixing ground of the vast eternal world and the swirl of particular heart, body, mind, condition, and circumstance. In a small and local way, we agree to step into a world in progress and help dream it on.
I was really moved when I read in D.T. Suzuki about this Mahayana idea that the universe made a vow to exist, that the universe came into existence, that those branches of light streamed from the dark because it had a vow to exist and be a universe and do all the things that the universe does. And I got fascinated by how our own vow, our bodhisattva vow, matches that vow of the universe, or how we can learn to align with it, you know. And I think one of the things koans allow for is the substitution of a kind of intense focus on the self by the vow, putting the vow at the center. And that makes a real difference in a life. And obviously it makes a difference in terms of how you are and what you do, but it also makes a difference in terms of a sense of, oh, this is my vow, and it's the microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe's vow. So what is all this vowing going on? What is all of this, this, you know, sort of beautiful intention toward existence and toward each other?
Yeah, indeed. What is it?
That's what koans are for, finding that out.
We've sort of moved into the area, I feel, where we began, which is koans for these barbarian times.
Mm.
And you write a lot about the question of answers, off the cushion, taking koans into the world. Like, where is that fire on the other side of the river? Can I see it from the street corner? Here is the sound of one hand under the water falling from the shower head. Koans to carry in your pocket. But also, you said, as we awaken, we aren't waking up from the dream, but into it. And it's sort of this awakened life. And you wrote a lot about that 4 years ago when there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty in society, in the economy, beginning of the pandemic, political uncertainty. And we actually made it a special issue of the Uncertainty Club, which is our online magazine. And you wrote about the myth we're in and seeing the world as a myth. And you talked about the Asuras and, the Asura in chief and breaking the spell and how it was necessary for us to be guides. And then the initiation and then exile and home. And I'm curious, you may not remember in great detail all that writing, but I'm curious in the evolution of your views over the last couple of years of where you are right now with that engaged koan practice in the world, in society.
Yeah, I would say my perspective has flipped from what's the koan role in society, when we walk out the door with the koan, what are we going to do, to with the climate crisis asks the question of everyone and everything, what are you going to do about the climate crisis? Like, that's the question. And so it's not what can the koans do in the world, it's the climate crisis asking us, what are you going to do about the climate crisis? And I think the koans have a lot to do about that, not in terms of answers, but in terms of how we align our hearts to what's happening, how we open our hearts to what's happening, and how we engage with the questions. It doesn't give us answers, but it gives us a tremendously powerful practice for engaging in a good way with the questions. And I'm really interested, as I give these talks about the books and am, meeting with people who don't necessarily have a koan background or an immersion in what we all kind of take for granted. The thing I say that is challenged the most is the idea of holding things provisionally and not being certain, because there is this sense of urgency. We're in this tremendous crisis. It's all that we know that it is. We have to be certain, we have to be strong, and the koans are this can be a kind of interesting counterforce to that, saying, well, what's it like if you don't know, but you care with every fiber of your being about this question of the survival of the world and mass extinction and all of that, and what do the koans have to say about that? So that what I'm coming to see is, you can say the obvious things about that not being certain keeps us open to new information and to changing our minds as we learn new things. And I think that all of that's true. But I think something else is true too, which is holding things provisionally allows them to live in us and do that gestation we were talking about before, and allows time for all of us to come together to take up that question, rather than it being a matter of, what do I think about this? Well, hold it for a while in the dark and see what all the parts of yourself has to say about that. And that seems really important in unprecedented times with no rule books and no playbooks. I call that abiding nowhere and deeply. Can we come with no position, no predetermined position, but deeply, deeply living the question and caring about it? And take the time to see what happens.
Nice, yeah. Your ending line of that series. Can you love a broken world? Can you love your own broken heart? Do you see how these are deeply moral questions?
Because they have deeply moral effects depending on how you answer them, right?
And deeply personal, right?
Yeah.
Well, if people have questions, please text, chat me, or probably more convenient to chat, send something to me. But I want to ask you, Joan, about what are you working on now? What great stuff can we expect?
Well, I don't know about that. What I'm working on now is kind of some of the things we've talked about tonight, is about this sense of the koans, even out, if you let them move outside Chan and Zen into the world, and particularly into the natural world, and you let them drop down, or you explore how they are a kind of underground current underneath the surface layer of things, what is possible then. And so I guess I'm trying to answer my own question about how the urgency of this time looks at everything and says, what do you have to say about this? And I'm trying to figure out what, from my perspective, the koans have to say about this, what they offer in this time.
Yeah. And it seems like the answer's coming out through the earth. I just, that image that you created just feels so strong, to me, and so beautiful. Yeah.
And right there, already right here,
Yeah.
we don't have to invent something or figure something out. We just have to see it, and lift the water up.
Yeah. Nice. Right. Jon, Allison, any thoughts, questions?
My reaction is it's just great. It's great hearing you talk. It's great hearing that little starlit or moonlit or sunlit piece of the book come forth, and I'm kind of thrilled with that. And I do want to hear, you are doing something. You mentioned to me sometime you're sort of doing something like, where's it going now? It more or less as you're teaching, or maybe I should say, one of the things for me I realized is that, well, I'd like to fix the world. I'm really a teacher for my sins. Somebody asked me, "Are you a this, that, and the other?" And I said, "No." Actually, the Shambhala Sun guy. I said, I'm actually a useless Zen teacher. So, and so there's something marvelous about having, in a way, the thing that opens out into the universe, which is kind of what the koan is. And I think what you were talking about yourself, you're cultivating the awareness and the understanding of like how to pass it on, and how it opens, and which is more helpful and all that sort of thing. So I don't know, I guess I'd like you to talk around that vague.
Yeah.
But it seems the heart of your territory is what I'm saying.
That's a lovely vague field to roam around in. One of the things that really surprised me about publishing this book was right afterwards, I had this enormous sense, you and I spoke about this. I had this enormous sort of Saoshan moment. Today, I have requited my duty to the ancestors, and I would say also to my students, because I wanted to get, if I were going to retire, which I did, I ought to give them something that they can work with, since, they don't have me around to hector them. So, but there was this sense of, okay, I have done as a teacher in this lineage what I needed to do to requite my gratitude to the ancestors. And now something else is happening. And I'm not sure I would say I'm a teacher anymore. I'm exploring maybe what a post-teaching relationship has to do, with the koans is like. And again, to repeat something I said before, the power of teaching koans is so great that it took me 7 years of retirement to come to a place where I felt like I could imagine a different relationship with them. And I think that's what's happening. and I don't really know enough about that to speak intelligently about it, but I can sort of give you a teachy example. You know, one of the things I realized you have to do as a teacher is you have to represent the whole tradition, even the parts you don't like. You know, like you can say you don't like it, but you still have to come to terms with it, you know. And suddenly I don't feel required to teach the parts I don't like or don't feel an affinity for, you know. It is not necessary anymore because I'm not in that role. And then what happened was that, I'll give you like one quick example. Images that I had just never felt harmonious with, had never felt a sort of a sense of you know, something with resonance with, started changing just completely. So that the whole image about capturing the capital city, you know, coming into the capital city and capturing the capital city, which just never was a for me an image that was a resonant one. And suddenly I thought, wait, what if it's not the capital city? What if it's a labyrinth, or Borges's universe as library, you know, or a memory palace, or it could be all these different things, you know. And so it's not a matter of taking administrative control of the capital, but it's all these other ways of feeling the world and coming into them and exploring them. And then I had this image of being like a flâneuse, you know, walking around the Paris and enjoying the boulevards and the gardens and the museums and the cafes, you know. So the image just completely changed for me from a kind of military, you know, taking control of the self, to this sort of wonderful enjoyment of the beauties of this city, or universal library, or labyrinth, or memory palace, or whatever it could be. And so the images have just begun spontaneously to open out and change like that. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not a matter of throwing things over or abandoning them from the tradition, but holding them and watching them change into other things.
Yeah, I'm thinking you mentioned Daisetsu Suzuki as somebody who I think taught a lot without just by writing, right?
Yeah.
You know, very influential for many of us, you know, and the kind of his metaphors, and also the friendships he made with people like Eric Fromm and the psychoanalytic people. The thing, I mean, I'm really struck. The whole thing about Zen does it. It teaches you to move in the dark, that you have to move in the dark. You have to, like, even to be in this moment, you're not moving in the next moment, you're moving in the dark. And I think that, you know, I'm just struck by how much that's a deep part of what you're telling us, really. And it's trusting fate, and trusting the universe, and trusting the unconscious forces and archetypal forces. Somebody says here, what do the koans themselves want? You know, that's Gregory, I think. So sort of a kind of, you know, what's coming through us, that's apart from our wishes or desires or our need to be helpful, or all that kind of. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I think my quick answer to that question of what do the koans want is that's the unfinished question. You can never come to a conclusion about that. You can only pay attention and watch how it goes, and what's happening.
They're wanting with me right now, what they're doing to me or with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. I've taken a lot of the time. So, I don't know, John, did you want to ask someone else? Or?
No, I'm loving the dialogue. Keep going. Yeah, Allison, please.
One that relates to that point about what do the koans themselves want. I was very intrigued when you mentioned that, Joan, and how not placing oneself in the center in a way, and how it's very much like working at making a painting, where the painting itself might want something different than I, the painter, wants. And so it's a conversation, I guess, and it has its own life outside of me that it's living. And I wanted to know if you could speak to any experiences you've had where the koan might have wanted something other than what you wanted.
Well, it's such a big thing because to me, like, that's how I would describe our revolution, what we did that was revolutionary 25 years ago, or whenever it was just simply listening to the koans for what they were doing, what they were wanting. And, I use that quote from Soa Nakagawa writing to Senzaki and saying, the koans have been enclosed in a box, and hearing them in English, they're out of the box, and the dog is so joyfully alive, and so my first experience of that was actually in listening to students. Students would come in and they would say, "This is what's happening with the koan." It's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not in my book," and the question that we were confronted with, it's hard to remember now because it's been so long since it changed, but we were kind of like, well, what do we do with that? Do we say, no, you have to get what's in, we have to go back to the book and I have to make sure that or do we listen to what's actually happening? Because I was hearing the students speaking about their own experiences and saying something about themselves, but I was also hearing the koan speak through them and saying, whoa, hello, there's something else that could happen here. And in the book, I describe it as sort of, okay, do we have to make the students stay within the confines of the tradition as we received it, or do we just let this go and try to keep up? And that's obviously what we decided to do. So that was my first really powerful experience of it, was hearing the koans speak through the students, and they didn't realize that that was what was happening, but I could hear that, and how beautiful that was, and how thrilling, how completely thrilling, to feel that this treasure of world culture that I loved so deeply was saying, we want something new now. We want to try something else. Will you help? Wow, what an invitation,
That's such a marvelous response. That the kind of wildness of that the koan itself was a free animal.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to move where it wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more go ahead.
Hey, can I just say, Allison, also, I think like painting or other creative work is such a good companion to that, because you also have to put the brush on the canvas. You have to do something. You have to start somewhere. And then the painting says, no, not that, this, try this, see what happens if you, so you have to be willing to engage and start and use your skill and your knowledge and bring it to the process, and then be really willing to have the painting say something else, and to listen for that.
Yeah.
And
sometimes it's very hard to give up something I might be in love with that the painting itself didn't care for.
Yeah.
And then one more question, if I may, from the beginning of when you were speaking, and you were talking about when you were in UCLA and you first encountered koans and you were doing translations, and that you said this marvelous thing that the person that you were working with was correcting, not just, you could tell at some point that it wasn't just the language that they were correcting, but also the living koan, the prajna inside the koan. And if you could speak a little bit, if you remember, to what was your sense of that, of what it was saying, or what you're noticing about that?
Oh, I'm not sure I can remember specifics. That's a very long time ago, but I can remember the feeling of, there is a big mind behind. We were doing the Gateless Gateway. And, the language of that is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward and a little rough even, So it's not like it's tricky language, like Yunmen has tricky language, most of it's pretty simple. But as he would say, well, look at it this way, or think about this, or maybe it's really trying to say, it was like, oh, wow, there is such a big mind behind this. And I could spend my whole life trying to understand that. And I think that was the large feeling of what happened. Something just fell open and seemed immense in a really beautiful way to me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you.
Can I have another?
Please.
The cherry. Jenny, the couple of things, like, it's so exciting to hear someone, you know, describing this whole thing in your way. It's so great, because and I think about the things that are really, you really do have to, you're riding the dragon, but and the dragon's the universe really, but it's through the koans, it's we have got to ride that, not what we thought we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, for me, the thing about the question of what do the koans want, it's like what that wants that comes through us, learning to listen to that, learning to be free, really, that I couldn't be, when I wanted what I wanted, it doesn't, you know, that's not interesting, really. What the koans want is so much deeper and freer, and then I have to listen, and I hear you. I think that's the thing about where we're always moving in the dark or something. Do you have more to say about that? Or?
Well, just to say that, and if you do that, what you want is likely to change, right? Because when that
is what you want, it's not what you thought you wanted.
Yeah.
Right.
And this whole other thing falls open, and then that goes to something else, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, that it's not like you ever arrive, you know, it's you're constantly on the walk, which is wonderful.
I don't know if you got more time. Tenny has a question here about doing the work in the room. Yeah.
There's what's the key to being well fetched? As opposed to poorly fetched, I guess.
Poorly fetched, yeah. Failing to be fetched. Hi, Tenny. It's nice to see you. I think it's just being open to it, not putting up so much resistance to it. You know, that the world really wants to fetch us. The world is trying to fetch us all the bloody time, you know? And so you have to work kind of hard not to be fetched. And most of us do work kind of hard a lot of the time not to be fetched. And so it's more like putting down all the demurals and the defenses and everything, and just letting it happen, And maybe there's a kind of courage that's needed to do that. And I think one of the most important things that koans do is give us that kind of courage to allow the world to come and get us. And, you know, as John was just saying, and kind of pull us into the dark and be willing to take that ride into the dark. So I think simply being undefended to being fetched and to being alert to it. I mean, it's coming toward us. Again, it's not like we have to engineer this or manufacture it. It's just coming toward us all the time. And so it's more a matter of standing there and letting it come and get us.
Tenny's written question is, can you say something about doing work in the room when you're sensing the student and the koan are immersed in a reality, deep and malleable conversation? What's the conversation like, and what becomes, quote, vividly apparent, end quote?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the tradition is that's going to be different for every work in the room and every person. You know, every meeting is in that space is a meeting among the student, the teacher, the koan, and the vastness, you know, right there in that room. And that's never going to configure in quite the same way every time. And so I think it's more like, I can't describe what that is, but I can describe the willingness to be open to paying attention to what's actually happening, what's actually unfolding in that moment, which is different from every other moment.
Thank you, Joan. Well, with that, I think we'll end it. We've got Jordan, who I believe has some music for us. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Joni. It's so wonderful to read your book and to visit again. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, so much for having me and for your wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Jordan, can you take it away? Beautiful, Jordan.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that again. I haven't heard that in a while.
What is the heart of the ancient Buddhas? Flowering grove and forests of every color. Thank you all for coming tonight. Pacific Zen, we've got a lot of things going on at pacificzen.org. We have a retreat coming up in October. That's an online retreat. We have John's Sunday mornings at 10:30 Pacific time. We have a Tuesday night thing with Allison and several other teachers. We have a Monday night for me. We have Wednesday night. We have Thursday night. Lots of things. We have open temple every morning, which is wonderful. So please join us again, and thanks for coming.